Welcome to Medicine Redefined, a podcast focusing on helping you reclaim ownership of your health. I'm Dr. Darsha.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja. We're your hosts, here to challenge conventional practices and uncover the stories behind pioneers shaping the future of medicine.
Our conversations not only focus on the individual level to dissect common practices for health optimization, but also zoom out to enhance systemic change.
Join us as we look to break the status quo, move the needle forward, and put the health back in healthcare. Joe, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Man, the pleasure is all ours. Excited to get you back so quickly for our part 2 here. I think that somewhere halfway we realized that we're definitely going to have to spend, because this is something that we all nerd out about and we get super excited about, and we could probably spend hours and hours talking. So cool. I think as a courtesy to the listener, probably makes sense to break it up. And so We spent a great deal of time that first hour and a half talking about your genetic makeup, but also the makeup like above the neck, right? And I think that's something that I want to dive a little bit deeper into, the psychology of bodybuilding today. We also talked a lot about nutrition, specific training protocols. And I think that now that we have all that out of the way, I'd love to start about talking about other lifestyle factors. So I think we have emphasized the importance of nutrition multiple times on this podcast.
Yeah.
Of course, from physique competition, we talked about that with you, and then also training. The other big pillar that people talk about with respect to recovery, right, is sleep. So I want to get your thoughts on kind of how you think about sleep, both when you are, and also even during like different phases of your competition. So maybe as you are, losing, getting really, really aggressive with your calories, how that affects your sleep, and how do you do, or what do you do to mitigate if there is detrimental effect to
that? Sleep has always been my. I sleep well when I sleep, but I've always not put it, stacked it at the top where as high as it should be, because if I have like my hours are sort of spread out throughout the day. It's not like a typical like 9 to 5 day, and I need time at the end personally of the day to sort of unwind and just either get to spend time with my wife or just spend time by myself to sort of unwind. And then I start prepping food for the next day if I'm depending on my schedule. And so sometimes I probably get between, honestly, 5 and 6 hours sleep a night. And I function very well on it. I don't, walk around tired. Everyone has those days. But I really try to make it an effort to get, I try to make an effort to get above 6. I'm never getting 7, honestly. I could tell you I am, but that would be a lie. I'm just not. And I know how important the sleep is. But also, I just need the time to myself and or time with my wife to just have, see each other. And, just that's part of my stress relief. I know we're going to get into stress and stress relief factors and stuff. That's what really helps me. So I'm happy when I can get 6 or above. Most times or not, it's somewhere between 5.5 and 6, honestly. And has that held me back? I don't, maybe it has. I don't know. I think everyone's different as far as, what their requirements are. I know, in the bodybuilding, journals and everything, it says in your bodybuilding 101, it says get 8 or 9, and the more you can sleep. I will take a nap when I can, 20 minutes or a half hour during the day. Usually do that 2 or 3 times a week when I can. I could sleep anywhere. I could sleep in my car, which is like, that's almost like a gift, because I know a lot of people have trouble sleeping. I never have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. But just getting into, bed, because I feel like I need, that personal time. So that's always been a challenge.
Yeah, of course, the 7 to 9 recommendation is kind of a general idea, but there are outliers, and we've talked about this and we've emphasized the importance of sleep. But I think another thing to think about is there are trade-offs too, right? There's the ideal way to do things, and then there's the practical way to do things, right? You're a family man. You mentioned your relationship is important to you and how that helps you cope with other stressors in life. And not to mention, I think people forget how stressful, in the sense of disorganized, and the life of a coach or a trainer can be. I don't know how many places you're at, but I remember when we were working together, right? We would start, typically our meetings would be at 3 o'clock and would go
Mm-hmm.
till sometimes 7, 8, or 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
And, in the mornings you'd be at Equinox.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe at some point in the middle or earlier before that, you were getting your workout in.
Yeah.
And so sometimes like when you have clients, like you're scheduled and you have a 2-hour break and then you're, figuring some stuff out and it's not consistent. It's a not 8 to 5, 8 to like whatever, 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is very disruptive to just all types of, life things and planning and sleep in general
Right.
too. I mean, I remember when I was a pre-seed, like I'd get home at 10:30, sometimes 10 o'clock at night when I was going with my peak guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd be so, I mean, you know how it was. You're
Yeah.
fired up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
You
by
just
the
can't
time
turn that off. Right.
you have to be fired up to get these, like a
Yeah.
group of like 20 high school kids. And
Mm-hmm.
so by the time I wind down, it's like 1, 2 in the morning. And then there were days with my other job, like I was going in to open at 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
and so, I think again, that's the practical side of thing. I'm curious though, in like, I guess your colleagues, do you guys talk about that stuff in terms of sleep quality? And, are there other people that you find who are also thriving off of what we'll say is little sleep, like 5 to 6 hours?
I think a lot. I think it's pretty common with definitely trainers. I probably talk more with trainers than I do with bodybuilders. I mean, I talk with some bodybuilders, but the more trainers I was always around, their schedules. You almost have to. It's like when someone says, "Oh, are you available at 8 o'clock?" And if you're trying to build up a clientele for like a lot of people, are and were, they make themselves available even though it's maybe not the most ideal time. And then like I said, if someone has kids, like I only have one child, but if he has basketball that goes till 10 p.m. at night because the court's only available from 8:30 to 10 for his age group, and then other days swimming's until 9:30, by the time you roll into your house it's 10 o'clock or after 10. And then if you want to have an hour or two to yourself or to spend with your spouse, next thing you know, it's coming up on midnight, and then you're like, oh, I gotta get off the couch, and I have to get up at 6. But then I didn't prep any food, and then it becomes like it's a tough like cycle to sometimes break. You know what I mean? So, and in prep, it becomes even harder because there's less leeway as far as what I'm allowing myself to eat, and how fresh the food has to be and so forth. I'm not just gonna grab a couple of the Quest bars or something to bridge the gap. If I had cut those out, like I had said, now I have to have regular real food, so that always takes a little longer. But yeah, there are people that especially in our industry, as far as like training and everything, that do get by on less than ideal sleep, even though we're preaching to our clients to get more. So
Yeah, which is super interesting. I was recently listening to Dr. Mike Israetel. Do you know who that is?
mm-hmm. Yes, big fan.
Yeah, he's
Renaissance period.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I'm a big fan of him. He's so
Me too.
funny.
Yeah.
On his YouTube channel and
Yeah.
and just on Instagram. I was listening to him on, I forget whose podcast he was on, but the whole discussion was all about muscle growth and hypertrophy.
Mhm.
And at one point they talked about recovery. I think, there used to be a point where people would say, oh, I'm overtrained. Just the average Joe would say that. And I
Right.
don't know if this was Poliquin who first said it or whatnot. It's like, nah, you're not overtrained, you're under recovered.
Right.
And so when they came to that and they were talking about sleep, Dr. Ezechiel was saying, look, if you're not getting 7, 8, 9 hours of quality sleep, or if you're requiring medical doses of caffeine to stay awake,
Right.
which is this guy,
Yeah.
then I don't even want to hear about your program. I don't want to hear about the tempos. I don't want to hear
Right.
about this. And I was like, oh crap. Like,
Yeah.
we're maybe emphasizing, but then again, context is everything,
Mhm.
right? We talked about that. Like if maybe you do get that extra hour of sleep, and you don't get the time to build your relationship. I mean, what did you say? 36 years?
Yeah.
We've
We've been together.
Like
Since
yeah.
I was 19. We started dating when I was 19. So, and then we've been together since. So.
Right. And so how do we measure how much that hour times 36 years, how successful, like how much that's contributed to your success, right? There aren't many objective measures for that.
Correct. Right.
So yeah, so I think it's very important for people to realize, oh, well, if my coach is doing this and he's doing that, or if Joe,
Mhm.
who is a world class bodybuilder, is kind of getting away with this, then I might be able to do. I think that's very important to realize, kind of like your situation, and again, not everybody can tolerate that. Like if you truly are special like that, I know one or two people in my life who would really truly thrive, not just survive, truly
Mhm.
thrive.
Yeah.
Um, then yeah, okay, you've been genetically gifted.
Right.
Again, we know you're genetically special because we know you don't do abs, and
Well,
we'll put a
yeah,
picture up
that's like
there.
someone who has like, those guys that have 19 or 20-inch arms and they barely do any curls or whatever. I wish I was sitting here telling you I was that person. I'm not, but I do. I think I've done well on little sleep. I'm not telling you that. Certainly, I'm not advocating that's the way to go. But like we've said, you have to have choose your trade offs and so forth. And if you're single, it's different. And also, I think the more stressful your job is and your life is, yeah, you probably do need more sleep to recover, to deal with that stress. And I luckily don't. I don't have a stressful job. I'll be the first to admit. And I mean, everyone has normal stresses in their life, but my relationship is, anything but stressful. Anything, it's not stressful at all. So. I think maybe if I was trying to compete and prep and do all those things on top of having like a stressful home life, then it would probably be that much harder. Maybe I would need that much more sleep. So I don't know. I chalk it up to that, honestly. You know.
What about, like, as you're coming down to the wire for prep? Maybe you're 3 weeks out, calories are at an all-time low,
Hmm.
you are training hard, and I mean, we know that from a hormonal standpoint, a lot of the, like, testosterone is going to be low because you're just so, although the strategy you talked about in terms of that cycling
Hmm.
allows you to kind of stretch that out a little bit, but still, I think
Yeah,
by the time,
you're
as
gonna suffer
you're
some.
trying to get the, yeah, you're going to suffer. And I, again, from personal experience, but I've also read quite a bit about this. When you're that low in calories and for that extended periods of time, it becomes very challenging to fall asleep, and your sleep quality gets compromised as
Hmm.
well. So those 6 hours, let's just say, that you are getting, do you find that to be a little bit of extra of a struggle? And how do you mitigate that, especially those last couple of weeks when it's just, you are just freaking hungry?
Yeah, I don't. I haven't. I don't have trouble. Knock on wood. Falling asleep, and even when I'm deep in prep, I may actually go to sleep a little earlier. I try to. I don't subscribe to like I can't eat late at night because it's going to turn
Mm.
and somehow magically turn into fat. When you're in a deficit, it doesn't. I'm not eat. I'm still eating good food, but I'm eating like right pretty close to bed, and that blows people's minds when I tell them that. But especially if you're in a deficit, you're not gonna. I'm not worried about gaining weight, and it's going to help me. So for some people, eating too close to bed, it maybe disrupts their sleep. I've had a couple of clients tell me that. So I try to tell them to, cut it off at least a couple, 2 or 3 hours before bed. But I sleep better, when I have something in me. And I may even go to bed slightly earlier if I don't have as many calories. I'm trying to go to bed with still that feeling of, oh, there's something in my stomach. And if I hang around too long, then it's going to start to go away, and then it probably would get harder to sleep. So as it gets a little closer and the calories get lower, I might even get an extra half hour because I'm like, I better go to bed now before I do get hungry. So,
Yeah, Joe, do you
but
subscribe to like certain macros at night? Like, will you do carb heavy at night, or like how do you think about your macronutrients before sleeping?
I don't I would keep it I keep it balanced. I don't do the exact same thing every night, but if I want to have if I wanted to have like a chicken sandwich, like on Ezekiel bread, I have that. So I'm not worried about the carbohydrates at that point. They're low glycemic, and it's going to keep me full. And I'm combining it with the proteins with that carb, so I'm not worried about any insulin spike or anything like that. But I know a lot of people are like, oh, after 6 p.m. they don't have any carbohydrates and so forth, and yeah, if that works for you, that's great. I mean, that's
Yeah,
what's so interesting about this sport is everyone just does it. There's certain things that everyone does pretty similarly, but then there's a lot of leeway to find out what works best for you, and that's what I've subscribed to. So yeah, I'm not worried about eating carbs at night. I'm not eating yodels or anything like that, so I'm
Yeah.
not
I
worried
mean,
about it.
that's absolutely good news to hear, though, right? Because like when it comes to
Yeah.
your sport, which can be on the extreme side of the spectrum, and knowing that
Mm.
different things work for different people, where we live in a culture of social media where don't eat 3 hours before sleeping to get better sleep,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure you're rationing out your carbs more later in the day and protein in the morning.
Right.
I hope the listeners can understand here that, yeah, you got to do what works for you. And I absolutely love the whole idea of trade offs, right? And I believe in the idea of stress, like you said. Like stress, I think, is the thing that we really have to be more nuanced on in our lives, right? I think the classic example is Warren Buffett, where he drinks a Coca Cola a day, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everyone would say a Coca Cola a day definitely does not keep the doctor away.
Right.
But for him, I mean, he's thriving, right? I mean, for him, having that Coca
Right.
Cola every day is something that de-stresses him. And for you, it's that social support, your family support. And I think I
Yeah.
really want to key in on that for people to truly understand that you really have to find what brings you joy and what is going to de-stress you in the end. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where the magic lies. So I thank you for bringing that up. To
Yeah, and
dovetail,
no
oh, go
one
ahead.
really wants to have that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying, no one likes that feeling. Everyone's gone through it a little bit where you're just like, eat, work, sleep, eat, work, sleep, eat, work, sleep. You know what I mean? If you have like no like downtime and no like fun time or whatever with your family, it sort of feels like you're on that hamster wheel. And bodybuilding prep after 6 months or whatever, that could feel like its own hamster wheel itself. You know what I mean? Which I don't mind that, but yeah, it does get a little bit like sort of rinse and repeat, like we talked about last time. But that's why it's good to, I think, that's the family time is just that. Like I said, that's probably my number one de-stressor, and just sort of takes me away from it and sort of normalizes everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I was going to dovetail on the question of on the timing aspect of sleeping and
Mhm.
eating. Have you or any of your colleagues broken up your sleep, waking up after 2, 3 hours just to, guzzle down a protein shake due to the fact that people will say, hey, you're catabolic at that point and we need to get calories in, throughout the whole day to stay fueled.
I've known maybe a couple people in my life that have done that. I've never personally done that, just because I'm like, if I'm getting 5.5 or 6 hours, I really can't afford to purposely get up. Now, if I've gotten up to go to the bathroom, I've been known to have like either on my nightstand or in the bathroom, like some just small thing of aminos, that if I'm up, I'm not setting an alarm to do that. But if I happen to get up to go to the bathroom, I've taken some like aminos and just, drank them down, because I'm always thirsty anyway. So I'm always drinking water, and I've just had that, but I've never purposely set my alarm for that. But I have known a couple people that have done that. So I'm not getting enough sleep to afford that. So
Hmm. What about other strategies for managing stress, right? So social connection, it seems like the biggest one, the most important one for you.
mhm.
Are there other things, again, particularly those times when you're hungry, irritability gets to be quite high?
Mhm.
um, how do you cope with that aside from family time?
I almost use, I guess, I don't know if this would qualify, but I write everything down in a journal. I've done that
Hmm.
since that's the way I was taught from when I was 19. So that's what I still do. I don't use any apps. And my journal, my food blog, whatever you want to call it, is almost feels like a journal. Sometimes I'll, write in there myself, which is sort of because, again, my wife's been with me the whole time, but no one really knows unless they've actually gone through it. You know what I mean? What it feels like. And it's not life or death or anything. I'm not trying to say that, but it gets challenging. But you have to remember, you chose to do this. No one made me do this. So it's, I don't like the wah wah wah, this is so hard, you know what I mean, and that type of stuff where you see it, where people put it on like social media, and then they just want you to say, oh, tell me how great I am, 'cause I'm struggling through this. But social media, not to get off on a tangent, but it's a fine line of support, and then there's, it goes the other way also, of people just wanting to tear you down. So, but I journal, to get back to the main subject, is I like to write in my food journal sometimes where I am and where I am mentally and how I'm feeling and so forth. And I think just writing it down this way, I don't have to burden my wife or my friends with it or whatever. So I just find, I sort of turning inward at that point to deal with it. So.
Yeah. Is that the same strategy you would use? Because when it comes to your sport, there's obviously going to be some sort of restriction when you're cutting. And so human nature wants to have that cheat meal, wants to grab that cookie, it wants to
Mhm.
cheat on itself. How do you cope with those thoughts, as Altamash alluded to, that irritability, knowing that, hey, in today's world, you can just walk down the street and grab anything, but you have to restrain yourself? What kind of self talk, what kind of internal dialogue do you have with yourself?
Well, as far as what I do, I think we talked about this
Hmm.
previously. I used to go through major cravings, and I think really finding the strategy that works best for you is what you have to do. So for me, it's easier to cut things cold turkey, and when I have when I raise up my calories for whether it be for that higher maintenance week or say it was just a day where I decide I'm going to go, 400 calories even above that. It's still the foods are still clean. I don't make them trigger foods where it's going to get harder to get back to where back on track as
I
far
see.
as because I'm not feeding into that like sort of sugar craving or that carbohydrate high that people get. And but again, like I said, it's really that is an individual thing where if you find where, like you said, Warren Buffett has one soda a day, if that keeps him from going completely off the rails. I mentioned I knew a bodybuilder who ate one Hershey Kiss a day throughout the entire prep that kept her like on track, that one piece of chocolate. But again, if that one piece of chocolate leads to, 10 pieces of chocolate and then a binge and so forth, like I said, I've experienced in, years ago, then that's going to really, then it just becomes like a cycle that's hard to break. So for me personally, I just sort of, when I'm in deep in prep, I just sort of keep my eyes on what I'm trying to do, eyes on the prize. And I know it's temporary. I'm going to have the Quest bars in, say, 3 or 4 weeks when I'm done. And it's really, we build it up more in our head as far as, how good that was and how good it tastes and so forth. And especially for bodybuilders. Again, I'm not talking about general population, but sometimes you have it and you're like, it was good, but it wasn't really what I built it up in my head. When you can't have it, or you tell yourself you can't have it, that sometimes makes it, like it's something more amazing than what it is. And that's just like a psychological, mind game that you have to sort of play with yourself. So,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Altamash.
No, you got it. You
Yeah.
got it.
All right. Joe, one of the things that you talk about are the three intelligences, right? So mind, body, and emotional. Can you take us through each of
mhm.
those and what they mean to you?
Well, as far as like with prep goes and everything,
Yeah, kind of how you relate to it, what you would coach somebody else, and what that truly means to you, and how you would coach that to somebody else. Why those three are important, and how to enact them in your life.
so from my point of view, I think bodybuilding is, so much, 90% mental. I think the longer you go in it, and I'm not just talking about the eating part, but like the focus required within each session, within each set, from rep to rep of how much you're going to extract from that, right? So I don't really look at it as, I can do this much weight for that many reps. I'm always talking about whether it's to my clients or to my just that internal talk to myself of the quality of what it is I'm doing and how locked in can I stay. Each set's going to last 30 to 60 seconds. How locked in can I stay during that? And how much can I get out of that set? Because if I'm doing, let's say you're doing 10 sets of chest or 12 sets of chest that day, and each set's going to last, 30 seconds, or so, or you say even up to a minute, that's, anywhere from 6 to 12 minutes of actual work. That's not that much time that you get to try to change and make a change. So how locked in can you stay and extract as much out of it as you can? But the body part is listening to your body and adjusting on the go. I go in with a plan, and sometimes, like I think we talked about last time, sometimes the weights just don't move that day, or body parts that you're not really aware that are sore or bothering you a little bit. You don't really notice them until you get going, and then you have to make a change on the fly. So, like I said, every day is not going to be a record breaking day, but you want it to be there's many ways to still make it productive, and productive as far as just getting a little better. It might be off the plan of what you originally thought you were going to do that day, uh, but it still can be productive. So I mean, that's the body part is, especially when you age, and I've been doing it a long time. You get more little aches and pains and so forth. And I think I mentioned that the prep takes significantly longer. I usually prep 20 minutes, 25 minutes of, bike and band work and prep sets and massage gun with the heated, attachment and so forth. And I go through, a lot because I want to I'm not just going in there to say I got a workout in. I'm really trying to, back to the mind part, I'm literally asking myself, is what I'm doing making a physical change that I'm going to be able to see on stage? It's not just there like for, hey, I'm going to get a workout in, I'm going to de-stress. I need to keep the focus of, is what I'm doing improving me for the next time I step on stage? And so that really sends the urgency just to a level that if I at some point, if I ever stop competing, I know I wouldn't be able to mentally reach the level, because I know the guys I'm going against and the competitions where these people are coming from everywhere, and they're so genetically talented and good that in order to have a shot, I have to be at that level mentally, that so then I can bring myself to that physically. So
Yeah, I think especially when we consider the longevity piece of it, right? I mean, we're talking a lot about the physique and changes, but
mm-hmm.
really looking at it a lens from the importance of diminishing fat, maximizing muscle, appreciating that muscle can help us preserve and maybe even enhance function as we age and age gracefully. That's
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate goal, right? So we can, in your case, spend more time, hopefully in all our cases, spend more
Mm-hmm.
time with the ones that we love,
Of course.
right? Have more of that social connection. And the body intelligence piece, I think this article that we link that one of our amazing interns found for us to when you were speaking about kind of just recognizing when you have it and don't want to push it because you just feel down or you are tired, and the importance of progressive overload, and then also recognizing when you truly don't have it, right? And because it's hard. In that podcast that I was referencing earlier, Dr. Israetel was talking about progressive overload, and
Mm-hmm.
you had talked about this too. Now, if you keep put on 5 pounds, at the end of the year, whatever, like per week at the end of the year, what is that? So that's 20 pounds times 10. So you're not going to put on 200 pounds, 220 pounds, or 240 pounds in a year on your bench, unless
Right.
like maybe you're on some PEDs and
Right.
you're novice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just not going to happen. And then linearly, if you train for 20 years, you're not going to have a 2,000 pound bench press at some point.
Exactly. Exactly.
But there are other ways to do that. And I think the further you are in the game, because your ego is also something, right? You're like, oh man, I'm still, because regression is going to be the hardest thing. So you're trying to find other ways to progressively overload that. And for you, year in, year out, 20, 30, 35 years in, like you always have to figure out other ways to challenge yourself. But then as you age, you understand your recovery capacity is low. You understand that there are other priorities in life. You have to be very intelligent with your body, because like any other sport, the most important ability is availability. And when you're prepping, there's nothing like an injury setting you back that's going to compromise your prep. And it doesn't really matter. Like,
Right.
you tear a pec or you tear a bicep or something like that. That's it. Forget it.
Right.
Especially in a sport such as yours,
Exactly.
where the most minute of detail and asymmetry from side to side
Right.
can be the difference between first place and second place, like you talked about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or first place and fourth place even.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the piece that takes a lot of time, the body intelligence for people to understand. Hey, like, when do I have it and when do I not have it? Versus like when like I don't feel like pushing it. Am I making sense, or is
Yeah.
there a better way, Joe, that you
No,
think you
I
describe
think
it to your
I think a
clients?
lot of people are probably influenced. None of the social media existed when I first started bodybuilding, obviously, and I think people like general population people will look at things on social media and see people doing amazing things or amazing transformations, and one you don't know really what's real as far as body, the changes in the body as far as like enhancements and so forth, and also if the person, like you mentioned before, are they taking PEDs, and this influencer is they change their body in 6 weeks, and why am I struggling to, why does it take me so long when this person is, I should maybe follow what they're doing and so forth. And that you're being constantly bombarded with that stuff on social media, and I mean that's where everyone's living on there today. So I think that is sometimes a challenge for people. They look at just some of the changes and they don't really know. You don't always know what's behind it, right? So what the person's doing, or what their life off of line is and so forth, and but also what are they, are they using things and so forth. And the you don't make crazy changes like that, and strength and crazy physique changes unless you're just starting out. That's when you make the most changes, and the longer you do it, the harder it gets to change. And this the jumps in the strength aren't quite as big. Your body slows down and so forth. So it doesn't mean you can't progress, but it's they people usually hit a wall, and then they want progress right away. So I can take this or that, and that'll get me past that. And so, but everything comes with a price on in one way or another. So that's what people have to make a decision for themselves ultimately. And as far as do they want to go down that road? And that's
Yeah,
but they are influenced by it.
absolutely. And I mentioned earlier that the name of the game is to stay in the game and obviously stay away from injuries as much as possible. And although we recognize that injury prevention is not really a thing,
Mm.
mitigating the risk of injury certainly is. That being said, though, sometimes they just happen, right? Sometimes other things just take over, and sometimes you just get unlucky. And again, that's part of the
Yeah.
game. Um, I'm curious if you've ever had any significant injuries, and if so, how have you dealt with that, or what was that process like, and did you continue training? And then I'm even also curious to hear about your thought process as you probably have accumulated some tweaks, so to speak, some
Hmm.
minor aches and pains. How do you modify your training through that, recognizing that that you can't really afford to lose time? Um,
Yeah, I've had one, knock on wood, one major injury. It was maybe 8 years ago or so. It was I herniated. I had a herniation in my lower back, and that was the first time I was um, ever in set back like that significantly. And like the first thing I thought of, it happened like in February, and literally I didn't think about work. This is just such a bodybuilder mentality. I was like, I have to get this corrected because I'm going to be on stage in September. And I was like, that was my initial crazy first thought concern. You know what I mean? And I might have taken off for a week. I went and did all. I went to PT. I went to a chiropractor. Long story short, I had the uh, I got two different shots in my back, and they helped, and it fixed it. And they were 2 weeks apart, and there were supposed to be three, but the doctor said let's keep the third one in our back pocket, and um, just in case we needed it. And I had to modify things absolutely. Um, the working lower body and so forth, I had to, it was coming down more the femoral nerve, so it was like it was some back pain, but it was going down the front of my thigh, and it would be like someone, it just felt like someone took a bat to my leg. And really the only time of the day when I was in, I don't want to say no pain, but the least pain was when I was training. And I guess that's because my body was releasing endorphins. And I would literally, for the most part, especially in the beginning, I would have to sit down, or if I was training a client, I would have to sit down like on a Swiss ball, because I couldn't stand for too long, because like my leg would just get, it felt like it was just almost like dead. And while I was doing like upper body stuff, I would sort of forget about the leg. It wouldn't go away completely, but it was amazing. As soon as I got done with the workout, 10 minutes later, I could feel like it coming back to my leg, and I was in discomfort again. So that was, that was truly scary for me. That was the first significant injury I ever had. And I've had other things, over the course of time, some inflammation in the rotator cuff where I can't do any overhead pressing, at all. I couldn't even demonstrate. I was trying to demonstrate an overhead press. I remember when I was at Equinox one time and I had a 10-pound dumbbell in my hand. I was showing a woman. I couldn't even demonstrate it for her because it was so impinged. Um, but those are more small, like temporary things that lasted like 4 or 5 days. And like I said, I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't abusing the bench press. Sometimes things just happen. And the one modification I made is I really don't pull off the floor anymore. I don't deadlift. If I do, it's with a trap bar, and I don't I definitely don't do anything where it's like near a max. I'll do it for somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, and work the muscle, work the pattern that way. But I'm not pulling off the floor for, I see people deadlifting, tremendous weights, and it's super impressive. But I said that's just no more for me, because it's not, again, it all builds muscle and everything, but the 1 to 3 reps is, it's not going to help me. Maybe it'll help you indirectly on stage where I get stronger and I could lift a heavier weight for my 10 range and so forth. But the trade off, like we spoke about, is just, for me, it's not there, and at least not at the level that I've pushed it in the past. So it's because, like you said, once you're out, man, there's nothing that sets you back quicker than something like that. It's debilitating. So
So I know context matters, but do you still think getting up to that strength where you're seeing, heavyweights 400, 500 pounds being deadlifted, do you still need to get to that point to be able to compete to where you're at and then find a way to back off? Or do you think it's still possible to stay in that, high rep range, 12, 15 throughout?
no, I mean, I do. I don't think it's necessary to do powerlifting unless that's something like you really want to. I mean, it all has its benefits, but again, as you get closer and closer to max weights, you're running the risk. It's just like, it's sort of like
Yeah.
sprinting. Sprinting is fantastic, but if you're truly sprinting, and the chances, the chance of you pulling your hamstring is a heck of a lot higher. And think of someone that's like general population, hasn't really sprinted maybe since high school, and they want to start, they saw someone online sprinting, and I'm like, you can't, there's a run and then there's a sprint. And if you're sprinting
Yeah.
like you're being chased by a dog, that's a full sprint. But the chances of you tweaking something and pulling something, I've done that where I've gone through the whole prep. I'm sprinting at a track. I do warm up ones and the whole 9 yards, everything. 20 minutes of prep I would do, and the sprinting time, if you think about it, if I'm doing like 60s and I did 8 of them, it's seconds if you add up all the time, right? It's not
Mhm.
that much work time. The prep time was so much more. I still pulled a hamstring. I couldn't have done anything more correctly. Sometimes it just happens and you just don't know why. But I don't know. I don't think it's completely necessary. I mean, I'm all for lifting heavy. I mean, I think 5 reps is heavy, and sometimes I even do like a 10 by 3 if I'm like doing, say, like like a Smith machine incline press or something, I'll do 10 by 3, but I'm only doing a minute in between. So I'm getting heavy weight. I'm getting some volume in of multiple sets. I'm hitting fast twitch fibers, but I'm not like lifting a weight for max of 1 or 2, or you know what I mean, like that.
Gotcha.
It's a weight I have to pick a weight I can get 10 sets of 3 with, where I'm only resting 1 minute. That's pretty much the heaviest I go when I'm lifting. I don't think it's completely necessary to, go much beyond that, or not on a regular basis, because it's you know, something will eventually, tear, or,
Yeah, for sure. I
happen.
think a big part of it's the ego too, right? I was a sprinter growing up, and
Right.
so many times I want to go to the gym and wish there was a treadmill that had 18, 20 miles per hour on it. You're amped up, there's people
Yeah.
around. It's like, oh, let me show people what I can do. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
once you hit 30 plus, Altamash, you're in my league here now, or I'm in your league now.
Yeah.
Yeah, those hamstrings, man, you really got to be careful. And now I'm glad. I'm like, okay, this only goes 12, 14. Run for 2 minutes
Right.
straight rather than trying to blow 8, 10 seconds at a
Yeah.
time. And so it's a blessing in disguise. And I think a lot of people just have to have that ego check when it comes to their max weight and things like that. And as Altamar said, stay in
Yeah.
the game, right? You want to stay in the game, because at some point it's going to be the longevity that matters,
Yeah.
right?
I've
That
said
long-term
this
play.
before. I've said this before. It's almost like a blessing in disguise that I was never naturally like strong, right? So maybe if I was naturally strong, I may have chased that, maybe the heavier weights and the more toward the powerlifting. Maybe I would have. But I mean, I in college I was tried to bench 290, and that was the heaviest I remember. I was trying to, everyone's trying to get to 300. I was doing 290, didn't get it, strained my shoulder while I was doing it, and that was it. I said, "What am I doing?" I was already bodybuilding at that point. I said, "I don't need to do 1 rep of something to be a bodybuilder." You know what I'm saying? To get
Yeah.
what I want, and luckily it was just a strain. And it could have been a heck of a lot worse. You tear your rotator cuff. You go from bench pressing 405 to barely the bar, right? You know
Mhm.
how that works. If it goes, you're done. And that was like, it was like a warning. My body, anytime I go too heavy for me,
Yeah.
my body just
Yeah.
gives me a little signal and says, remember what we're doing here, and remember
Mhm.
what you're built for, and so forth. And
Yeah.
I go heavy. Heavy is all relative, right? It's
Yeah.
relative to some gen population and some housewives. I'm like, I lift like Superman, but next
Yeah.
to some bodybuilders, I see them and they're amazingly strong, and just they're squatting 405, and it looks like when I'm doing 135, and it's just that easy for them. And
Yeah.
God bless, but thankfully, there's more than one way to skin the cat.
For sure. And that's where your mind and body intelligence come to play, right? So
Yeah.
well, Joe, I want to transition over to understanding lab work and imaging. Right, there's been a big push now in healthcare towards precision medicine, and so there's a lot of companies
Mhm.
out there that focus on getting lab work maybe every 3 to 4 months, and with that lab work, guiding people's lifestyles to improve testosterone and bring down inflammation, etc. Did you go through any type of lab work, consistently through your career, or any imaging like DEXA scans? Is that typically a thing at your time, or is that now more of a trend that we're starting to see?
No, I mean, I've heard of some of that, what you're talking about. I've never experienced it myself. I've never utilized it. I mean, I've never even had a DEXA scan. I
Yeah.
don't, everyone always asks um, when I'm prepping, like, what's your body fat? What's your body fat? And
Hmm.
I have no idea. I don't take it. I don't care. You know what I mean? It's just like, is they don't ask me on stage what my body fat is. And for me, as far as I get it for seeing progress. People want to track progress. That's all good and everything, but sometimes I believe there are too many numbers people start to obsess on, and so forth, and you lose sight of, you should be happy at the amazing progress you've made, and you're doing things that you, especially with older population that I train, they're doing physical things that people sometimes half their age are not doing. You know what I mean? But as far as like the lab work, it's funny. I just switched doctors, and I'm going to get lab work done and so forth. And she'll do all the, basic things, but the, and if my testosterone last time I think I had it checked, it was like 680 something, which I think is pretty good. But if it was low, I can't take TRT anyway because it's not allowed. So you can't take anything, any external source of testosterone, even if it's for therapeutic. I think you're allowed to take thyroid if you have a low thyroid. I think there's an exemption for that if your thyroid was low. But testosterone, things like that. I mean, if they make people feel better, I have, I think, 2 clients who take testosterone, and it helps just with their overall well-being, and it's not necessarily, it's to help build some muscle and strength, but it helps with focus and sleep and all of that stuff. So if it's improving their quality of life just outside of the gym also, then that's, I think, I'm all for it as long as it's under, a doctor's supervision. But growing up, most of the people I was around were, self-administering, and buying it out of a gym and so forth. And you see these guys make tremendous changes and so forth. And, but it's, again, sort of, I get it for people. I mean, in one way, I sort of understand why professional athletes or some Olympic athletes do it or want to do it, because they want to have. I'm just looking to be on, personally, I'm looking to be on a level playing field, right? I like to go see the Mr. Olympia. I like to see the big, gigantic guys and everything. It's, it's like a crazy freak show. I like it. But I don't want to compete against them. I don't want to stand next to those guys, you know what I mean? And especially after putting, 6 months and years of work in. I understand the level playing field, but you see, I mean, over the course of the last year or two, how many pro bodybuilders have died? I mean, it's insane. You know what I mean? And they're all these guys in their 40s and 50s, just, having, heart attacks and stuff and dying way prematurely. So again, it's a trade-off, and you have to make that decision, ultimately yourself. But I'm all for, if people want to use, working in with the doctor together to monitor certain lab works, but I've never personally done it myself.
So that's I think a great bridge, and one of the things that we want to talk to you about, and that's PEDs in general, right? Just because the misuse of steroids is what people recognize them as in bodybuilding. And also, I think it would be good that we didn't talk about it, is when people look at bodybuilders, they just assume that every single one of them is taking some type of performance enhancing drugs. And if we're calling ergogenic aids, then really caffeine, creatine, all those things, those type of supplementation. So I'd love to maybe spend a few minutes talking about the differences of, maybe we could talk about, I think when we look at the Mr. Olympia and stuff, we understand that those are enhanced athletes. And then there are quote unquote natural athletes. So how do you explain to people like the different classes of bodybuilding, and what's quote unquote natural, what's not? And then what is, I'd be curious to hear the testing process like, and in your experience. And we don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm also curious to hear any stories and stuff, and how people are trying to beat the system. Because even though we were talking about keeping the playing field level, I think every single athlete, particularly in sports such as this, is trying to stay ahead of that curve in every sport.
Right.
I mean, cycling is the big one that gets a bad rap, and there's a bunch of Netflix documentaries about that, but baseball is another one.
Right.
But I think this sport, probably more than anything else, just because it's not as popular, it's probably doesn't have as many documentaries about it. But I'm sure you guys talk about that stuff and think about that stuff all the time.
Yeah, I mean, so if someone asks me, but I've only had a couple people ask me, and it's usually when it's ironic, when I'm at my smallest or my lightest is when someone may ask something like that. And just because you're more cut up and you could see everything sort of pops. But I mean, in reality, I'm 180 pounds, and And I tell them, I say, no, the federations I compete in are drug free, meaning you're allowed to take supplements and certain supplements, not even all supplements, but that you can't take, steroids or growth hormone or, TRT from a doctor and so forth. And I said, if I stood next to someone else who knew what they were doing and they were on steroids, I said, it really honestly doesn't even look like I lift weights when I stand next to someone that big. And that's the truth. I've had people ask me, am I a baseball player? I've had people ask me if I'm a professional dancer. It's like, it's almost hilarious. Like I come home and tell my wife, I said, someone asked me if I was a dancer today. I was like, someone asked me if I was a professional tennis player. I'm like, am I really built like a tennis player? You know what I mean? So, and it used to bother me years ago, and now I just sort of find it funny because it's like for a lot of like natural bodybuilders, you really almost can't tell what they look like until they're, without their clothes on for the most part, right? And then they're in their, whether it's a tank top or whether it's in just posing trunks and so forth, because you just don't have that enormous size to like fill out and so forth. But I'm all for, the more drug testing, the better. I go through polygraphs and urinalysis. And I think the polygraphs I started with the organization, first time I think was 1994. And there were different organizations along the way that I've done. One of them years ago was called the ANBC, American Natural Bodybuilding Conference, and they were a lifetime natural. So you go, well, how do you really test for lifetime? The only way to really do that is through a polygraph, because the urinalysis is only going to go back, months, I believe, right? And maybe some steroid metabolites might stay in your system for up to a year. But I mean, they don't go back. But, is it a deterrent? Yeah. And I think, they don't do blood. I think just because of the expense of it, it's just so expensive. But I've been getting polygraphed forever, and then they do the urine testing also. So they're doing the best they can. Like I said, it's expensive. They follow the WADA rules, World Anti-Doping Association. So I've emailed, the heads of WNBF years and years ago, and even, through the current years of, hey, this supplement is out. I just want to make sure I send them the label. Is this okay? I'm, just don't want to find out after the fact. So if I'm in question about anything, a new supplement comes out or might have a new ingredient, a lot of these supplements, they'll have one name, which is a banned substance, but then they have other sort of names, but it's for the same thing. I can't think of an example. I apologize, but you have to know all the different names, and sometimes it's just easier to send in the label and get it okayed, and as opposed to making the decision yourself, because they put it on us. They say if you're taking the supplement, you're ultimately responsible. So,
What's your supplement stack look like through different phases of the year? And are there any particular brands that you look at considering all the things that you just mentioned?
I mean, well, if you want to just start with like a protein, I've used all the different ones over the course of the years. I've used Just Whey. I've used a blend of whey and casein. Generally, I like a blend. Uh, so it has like the one I'm using now is by Vintage Brawn, and it has like beef protein, egg protein, milk protein. So that way, with the milk protein, I'm getting casein and whey. So I'm getting all these different amino acid profiles. Again, does it make it the release absorption the amino acid profile is different from every source, which I like. And it's like when guys would in the past, I sort of learned this from someone I used to work with. He would talk about having meals, even instead of eating just 8 ounces of steak. This guy, bodybuilder, sort of told me one time, or taught me, he's like, if you have like, say, 3 ounces of chicken, 3 ounces of beef, and 2 ounces of fish or so forth, you're getting a different amino acid profile. And it's funny because he said it's sort of like when guys would stack steroids. It's like if you take, this one plus one equals three, because they work sort of synergistically together. Now, if that's true, I don't know, because I don't do that, but I try to do the same stacking sort of principle with food and also with protein powders. So because they have all different amino acid profile, I think the better, the more of a mix, the better. Some are higher in this and lower in this, and the other one's higher in this and lower in that. So that, I mean, I use essential amino acids that have, branched chain amino acids. I'm a big fan of that. And when I'm in prep, I also take additional HMB, which is like a metabolite of leucine. It's like a downstream metabolite of leucine. And, leucine's like always looked at as like the king of, of the amino acids for turning on protein synthesis. Well, HMB is more powerful than that. And it's like a sort of downstream, like I said, downstream metabolite of it. And so I use that. And fish oil, multivitamin. I'm a big fan of beet powder. I use that in my pre-workout, like the Beet Elite. I don't know if you guys ever have used that before.
I
For
haven't,
raises
but
your
I've
nitric
heard good
oxide
stuff.
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I and just good for your cardiovascular system too. So,
Yeah.
and I use a pre-workout. Some people are anti-caffeine. I'm not. I use pre-workout that has caffeine, citrulline, beta alanine, all those things.
Yeah.
The typical. I look at the different profiles, and there's a million of them on the market, and that's why I tell my clients, if you want to take something, just send me the label of it first, or I could send you what I use. And you have to be careful with, like, I could always make a recommendation of saying this is what I use,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could look at it and you could decide yourself.
Right.
Because, like, remember years ago, ephedra was like very mahuang, right? I think if I'm saying it correctly, was everywhere in everything, Rip Fuel and everything, and everyone was taking it. It was legal and so forth, but like most other supplements, it started to get abused, and people thought if I take one, it's good, and two is even better, and then they didn't bother to read the label. If you have high blood pressure and so forth, you're not supposed to take this. And then there were people that had adverse reactions and or died, and that's the type of thing that ends up like on 2020, and so that gets splashed across, and then eventually they take it off the market. So
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so with supplements, I could tell people what I take. I could say, I feel safe with like amino acids and protein, and making recommendations. But anything that has any type of like a pre-workout, like a stimulant and so forth, if someone wants to take that, they have to ultimately make that decision themselves. I say, this is what I use, and then they have to go from there.
Yeah. What about creatine? Or I'm assuming it's in your pre-workout, or is that something that
Yeah,
you'll also supplement?
no, it's not in my pre. I have
Okay.
had pre-workouts that had creatine in them, but no, I take creatine monohydrate separately.
Gotcha.
It's not in. I use Total War currently for my. It's by Redcon, I think, for my pre-workout that has everything. Doesn't have creatine, and
Got it.
so I just add creatine. I usually split up the dose, like half pre, half post,
Okay.
and creatine is, from what I know, is like the most studied, the most has the most studies behind it, and as far
Mm-hmm.
as like safety and everything, and how well it works. So,
Yeah.
but you do have to warn people, especially. I just had a woman ask me that the other day about creatine. Someone had told her about it, and you always got to get everything sort of cleared with your doctor, right? So make
Right.
sure there's no underlying
Yeah.
issues. But at the same time, I said with creatine, you have to be careful. The scale, you may see the scale go up 2 or 3 or 4 pounds because you're going to hold more water in the muscle. And I don't want, I've had people like completely freak out about that
Mm-hmm.
where, they don't want to gain any weight and so forth. So,
Yeah. So I was going to ask you about that. Is that something you cycle, when it comes to
yeah,
competition time?
yes, I do. I always try to make sure that I'm on it through. Probably not the whole prep. I'll take like a month break, and then I'll go back on. Could be for 4 months and then go off. I don't do it. I do 5 grams at the most, and
Okay.
I split it up pre and post. If I take a break, or when I take a break, it's usually only for 4 weeks. I was going to say, though, it's not much really longer, and I try to make sure that I'm on it where I time it where it's going to be on it into deep into my prep. So it helps me with, regenerate ATP to keep my energy up. So.
Gotcha. Okay. And then Joe, I had one question. Going back to the doping and drugs, is marijuana legal or no?
I don't think so. On the WADA list, it'll list certain things, and it'll say certain drugs that are. It's not just for obviously bodybuilding; it's all for all sports, all the Olympic sports, and some of them like I
I
think
see.
like Adderall and so forth, or ones that lower your heart rate. Certain drugs lower your heart rate. Like you're
Hmm.
not allowed to take them if you're
Yeah, propranolol.
doing like archery or shooting and
Archery,
stuff
yeah.
like that. So,
Right.
but I mean, those drugs don't have any, you know, they're nothing to do with bodybuilding and getting bigger and stronger. But certain sports have their certain, I guess, drugs that people will, try to find an edge and use. Marijuana, I honestly don't know. I don't know if that's on the list. I would think so if I'm guessing, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if we're using the water protocol, then it has to be.
Yeah, I know cocaine's on there because that'll rev up your metabolism, and so it's
It's a
like,
pre-workout.
yeah, exactly.
We're working out forever. Talk about sleep, huh?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, let's since we talk about cocaine, let's shift to talking about the dark side of bodybuilding and just physique competitors in general. I think one of the things that a term that people probably heard is this term called body dysmorphia.
Hmm.
And it's something that's really challenging, and whether it's formally diagnosed or not diagnosed, and whether it's clinically relevant or not, like a true medical diagnosis. I think a body image issue, and I don't mean in the sense that people talk about or parade about, different movements and whatnot, just to be very, on one side of the aisle versus the other and very PC, but something that a lot of people who are in this business, that you are basically naked and you're stepping on stage and you have, hundreds of people judging you
Hmm.
and looking at every single fiber on your being to
Right.
see if quote unquote it's perfect or not. Is it the
Right.
perfect physique? That has consequences, right? And the longer that you stay in that has consequences.
Hmm.
Now, certainly there is a specific type of individual who's hardwired a certain way who's going to want to do that. But all the things that we've talked about over the last 2+ hours, they can, force, like have a vicious negative cycle or positive cycle that can perpetuate somebody's psychology, down a bad path. And so I'm wondering, how you think about that term body dysmorphia, what your personal experience have been, if you feel comfortable disclosing,
Hmm.
and what you've seen amongst the competitors, your friends, people you've worked with, and people you've competed with. Um, yeah, just general thoughts about that.
Um, I mean, it definitely exists. It's definitely a real thing. I think it's more so if you take the drug route, because a lot of times people, if they do step over that line, they think that that's going to be the thing that's going to solve whatever issue I have, and it's going to bring me to where I want to be. And it doesn't always do that, right? You have to do all the other steps and all the other work and so forth. And a lot of times people go, "Oh, I've gotten bigger," but it's either I'm not big enough, because it becomes like an arms race where you got this guy doing this, and this, and then there's always someone willing to do more, either higher doses or more of that, and then it becomes where it never feels like enough, which is, again, that's one of the reasons, aside from health, it's just one of the reasons I never wanted to go that route, because once you step over that line, it then becomes like you're already on that side of the fence, and you're grouped in with all those people, whether they're taking 5,000 milligrams or 200 milligrams. It's viewed as the same. You know what I'm saying? So I never wanted to be grouped in with that. And two, I know that if I would probably, with again my wiring in my brain, if I was going to do it, I was going to probably go the whole route, right? And do all these guys aren't just doing steroids anymore. It's multiple steroids, growth hormones, insulin, all these different everything. everything like under the sun, and it's hard for them even to come off in the off season a lot of times. I mean, I know some of them do, but when you come off, you do shrink down some. You know, they keep a lot of it. And even as a natural bodybuilder, when you're reaching toward that peak and you've done a couple of shows and you're at a peak for like, you look certain way for like, 2 or 3 months and you're at your absolute best. And then the season's over and you start to gradually go the other way. Yeah, I still experience that every year. It's just like, it's not like a depression or anything, but it's like, it's amazing that it's like over and then it sort of just gradually drifts away. The every seeing every little fiber just pop, even when you're not lifting weights and you're just moving and things are just, there that you've worked for, and they just sort of gradually, it's like floating away. And so yeah, it's always a little bit of a challenge, to sort of get like, all right, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is I'm supposed to get a break now, mentally and physically, and that's what's going to be best for everyone involved, family and everything, and also for my next year. You know what I mean? You can't. There's no holding a peak. There's no being at 8% or 6% body fat for the whole year and expecting to improve. Maybe you come in the same and you make everyone around you miserable, but it's there is some of that where as things gradually go the other way. And so I'm not even dealing with so much getting smaller. It's just the cuts and everything start to go away. The guys that are on anabolics, cuts are going away and they're getting smaller, which I could see where that could lead to like major depression, and whether they have to come off and because the doctor told them to, or they have to come off because they're not producing, their testosterone is not, their own testosterone is not working, and now they want to have kids and they have to come off and so forth. Coming down from that, I couldn't imagine, because like I've always likened it to, and I don't know if I said this previously, but like they supposedly when you're on, you feel like Superman, like how you and I feel when you just got done with a workout, everything feels great, everything's pumped, and you feel great for like, I don't know, maybe a half hour or an hour, you feel like Superman. And combine that with like coming into a show where everything's really peeled and then you feel even better. If you're coming off of a steroid cycle and you're shrinking, wow, that you go from essentially feeling like Superman back to like Clark Kent. That's the usually way I describe it to people. You come back down, and so the way I look at it is, I never want to even experience being Superman if I have to come back to being Clark Kent. That's the way when people go, why don't you go there? Because I said eventually I know you will have to, aside from the health issues and the ethical issues, it's all that's also a big thing. But I would never want to have to handle going from that to that. And that is, it's a you know, major psychological, play on the mind. So,
Yeah, it's tough, and it's particularly tough now that you have access to millions of people on social media. I know you're not on
oh yeah.
social media,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're going through Instagram and TikTok and the way that the algorithm works, if you end up liking something or if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at content, and it just, that's all that feeds you.
Oh yeah.
And then, as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. And it doesn't matter if you're at 6% body fat.
Mm-hmm.
If you have those types of intrusive thoughts, and perhaps I should have defined what body dysmorphia, I think that's probably more the layman terms. BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, is the appropriate clinical term for it, and it has multiple subtypes. I think one of them is like muscle dysmorphia, which we're talking about, just never big enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for them to be clinically relevant, for people to know, and again, it's not just simple as like, oh, I feel like a pig because I indulge after Thanksgiving. I think it's deeper than that. It's constant intrusive thoughts. It's actually a branch of in the DSM-5, which is our main psychiatry manual. I say ours, but in medicine,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a branch of the obsessive compulsive disorders.
Okay.
I think it's in that category. Darsh, correct me if I'm wrong there, but they and so it has subtypes, and then there's another one that's by proxy, which I think is recently introduced. But ultimately, they have to have intrusive thoughts. You can't function. It's causing a severe detrimental effect to your life and your quality of life, and maybe even so everybody around you. Kind of like you mentioned that you're miserable, and everybody around you
Right.
is miserable, and nobody wants to, like, that SOB is not somebody we want to hang out with.
Right.
But then it's year in, year out. What I was getting at with the social media thing, I think it's just it amplifies the negative mental health, the effect on the mental health piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could be the baddest mofo in town, in your circle, in your city, in your state, and the next thing you know, you're nothing compared to everybody else, right?
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden available in front of you. And if you have those thoughts when every time you look in the mirror, it's just that person's not good enough, now you're actually being shown somebody who is far better, you
Yeah.
don't stack up against. That's really, really scary. I think it's scary for individuals who are adults. We're talking about professionals who are in this field, but that's not, we don't talk about them enough. We talk about the kids, which of course, having a daughter, like I'm worried about that when I'm going to give her a cell phone. We talk about the teenage mental health crisis that
Mm-hmm.
social media has developed, and how girls are comparing themselves and young guys are comparing themselves to other people, and like what they're able to do, what they're not able to do.
Right.
But this is a real problem in people whose professions are largely dependent on how they are, how they appear to be. And so, that is scary. Because the other piece of it is, like, at least when you are working with somebody like Joe, you're training with somebody day in and day out, you see them, and all of a sudden a month later they come out and they look drastically different. If that person was sauce or not. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know what
Right.
I mean? Like,
Yep.
whereas in social media, you get a tiny sliver of their life, and you have no idea what's happening behind the scenes.
Right.
And so again, because the self-talk in the mind isn't quote unquote healthy self-talk, it's probably going to take you down a road where it's not going to end up well.
Yeah, well, the pool, when you're talking about social media now, you're, like you said, the pool that you're pulling from is the world, right? So as good as you look or as good as you are, now all of a sudden, it could be someone, in a far off country who is just genetically superior to you, and they've been training and everything, and you're like, all of a sudden they just completely blow you away. And I could see where that would either drive people into, if they're reliant on the feedback they get on how they look and so forth, and then that constant pressure to deliver, because if I'm not delivering, different pictures and shots and so forth, and then people are going to stop following me and so forth, and then they're going to start following the new flavor of the day. It's just, I mean, it's honestly, I'm so glad I didn't grow up in that time, and like we held off on getting, my son's 15 now. He got his phone when he was like 14, and where he could actually be on be on the internet at all, and he's not on any social media or anything like that. So it's just, you do your best, but with, it's, yeah, boys and girls are, yeah, it's just a tremendous amount of pressure that they're under now, and that they experience from, used to be just from the other kids in the class and so forth, but now could be, the pool is just, it's infinite, you know.
Yeah.
So that is scary.
Yeah. To sum it up, one of my favorite quotes, and one that I've been thinking about a lot more recently, is from Naval Ravikant, who says, desires are a contract you make with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. And so,
Mm.
it's pretty deep, it's pretty mature. And, I think if the listeners, if you let that sit in with you, you start to realize how many desires you have in this world. And, and
Right.
you need them, right? We need to, we want to succeed. We want to keep pushing the boundary. We want to change the world, change ourselves, change our situation, but at
Right.
what cost, right? And I think it comes back to looking at those stressors, looking at our lives, being more nuanced with what brings us joy. And so, Joe, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for coming back for part two. I know I've definitely learned a lot. I know this is all Tamash's space, but for me, this is somewhat new, you know. So I've
Hmm.
definitely enjoyed learning from you and your perspective and everything about the sport. So thank you so much for coming on. I do want to ask,
I
what is
appreciate you having
yeah, what's next for
me.
you from a coaching perspective, from competition perspective?
Well, for competition perspective, the season for me, the season usually starts somewhere around March, but for me personally, I've been competing just more in the fall, so I'm going to do the Mr. America again on I think it's the weekend of October 12th, and then the weekend after that, October 19th, I got asked to do my first guest posing at it's called the Granite State Open, an IMBF show in New Hampshire, and so I've never done that before. So, going to travel there and have that experience, and then definitely going to do the WNBF Worlds in Boston this year, which is November 24th. So possibly one other show in there somewhere, but those are the two definites. That those two things and the guest posing. And then just traveling with my family and when we can, and that's our favorite thing that we like to do. So get out, and my
Awesome.
wife and I've seen so much of the world, and now my son is at a good age to where we could start not just going on Disney cruises and so forth, and maybe
Yeah,
seeing more of the world. So it's good. It's I'm very very lucky and blessed. So but
amazing.
yeah, I love I love doing what I do, and helping people and so forth, and it makes me laugh. Sometimes people, if they'll be out eating or if they're working out on their own, they'll be like, "I heard your voice in my head," and that always makes me laugh. But that's it's a good thing, because you want to have, you're not just looking to help them, people for the hour that or so that you're with them. You want to hopefully have a positive influence on all aspects of their life and so forth. So
Yeah.
that's the goal, and that's I studied business in college. I don't know if I told you that on the first
Hmm.
podcast, and I didn't. Wasn't for me. So I'm
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
lucky to be able to do this. So
Love it.
it's
Well,
all good. I appreciate you guys having me on.
absolutely. Well, yeah, best of luck to you. I hope you have some awesome travels ahead of you too. So you're a coach. You're obviously promoting health in what is a sick care system. So last question we ask all of our guests is, how do we put the health back in healthcare?
I think you have to be an advocate for yourself, and I think that you sometimes it takes a little research on yourself and not just accepting the numbers or accepting if Uh, some doctors, I think, just if someone's a little out of range on something, they just want to go right to medication. And I think that you have the some say in that. And if that's the only way that to get it corrected, then thank God for medicine, right? But there are a lot of other factors that I think people can take charge of in their own life if they really do some self reflection. And what can I do? Sometimes that could be the new motivating factor of it's not just I want to lose 10 pounds and see my abs. It's if I clean up my diet and start doing cardiovascular exercise on a regular basis, I get to not take this drug. And you know what I mean? Because once you get on,
Hmm.
then it just becomes very easy just to you take your medicine every day and so forth. But I think
Yeah.
that the more that you can take charge of your own and work in concert with your doctor, um, I think that is the best way to long term health, and you use their expertise, your expertise, and you being stay inquisitive, and then you work together, and you find the best solution. And sometimes that does involve medicine. It doesn't always have to. But it's really either way. It's going to make you more mindful of you taking charge. You're the
Hmm.
one that's always you're with yourself 24/7, right? That's how it works.
Yeah.
It's like if I see someone 3 times a week training, someone goes, "Oh wow, you're seeing they're training 3 times a week. It's 3 hours." You know what I mean? I said, unless I move into your basement, I'm not going to be there when you're eating at night and when you're ordering out and so forth, and when you want to be hopefully exercising on your own and doing things on your own. So you have to then take charge of yourself, because you need to be your own best advocate, and that's usually that's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I love that, Joe. Well, thank you so much again for coming on.
Well, I
Thanks, Joe.
appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.